Hello everyone! In today's video I'm going to show you our procedures for the pre-flight inspection and walk-around of the Cessna 172. This is an important part of every flight, and whilst it's not an in-depth check, it's designed to verify that the aircraft is in a good general condition without any obvious defects. The aircraft right now is in a cold and dark state, having last flown yesterday. So we'll start off by sumping the fuel tanks. It's a good first step if the aircraft hasn't moved for a while, since any contaminants would have nicely settled into the sumps of the fuel tanks, and we don't want to move the aircraft too much before draining. We will use both the right and left wing tank drain valves as well as the ones in the nose. So before we do anything, we switch our fuel selector valve to both. There's 5 drain valves underneath each wing and 3 in the nose. And we're making sure to gather a good amount of fuel from every one of them. And we're checking to see that the fuel, our Avgas 100LL, is nicely light blue in color and free of any sediments or any other liquids. And once that's done, we can hop into the plane for the cabin inspection, taking off the pitot tube cover on the way. First up, we're going to take a look at the aircraft documents, making sure that they're all on board and that they're all also still valid. We also make sure that we have a first aid kit on board. Next up, we verify that the parking brake is set and magnetos are off with the key removed. We then remove the control wheel lock and stow it securely. We verify that the alternate static air is off, that the elevator trim is in the takeoff position, the fuel selector is on both, and that our fire extinguisher between the seats is secured in place and the gauge is in the green arc. Moving on to electrics, we check that both our avionics buses are off, and if installed, that our ADF receiver is also off. And once we've done that, we can turn on the master switch. After the G1000 has powered on, we check that all our engine instruments are working. We verify the fuel levels in the left and right tank, making sure that there is no low fuel annunciator shown here. But we do actually want the low volts, oil pressure and low vacuum warning visible like this. Now we turn on the avionics switch for bus 1, checking that we can hear the forward avionics fan and turning it off again. We do the same for bus 2, verifying that the aft avionics fan starts to spin. And then we can turn it off again. Afterwards, we turn on the pitot heat and step out of the plane to make sure it gets warm within 30 seconds. And then we turn it back off again. The cabin inspection is almost complete now. All that's left to do is extending the flaps to full, turning on all of the lights and walking around the plane to make sure the red navigation light and strobe on the left wing, the beacon and white nav light on the tail, the green nav light and the other strobe, as well as the taxi and landing lights are all working properly. We can now turn off all the lights again, as well as the master switch, so we can start with the walk around. We'll go once around the plane counterclockwise, starting here near the pilot's door. And during the entire time, it's important to check for any liquids on the ground and also for any contaminants on the surfaces like ice or snow. It's not going to be an issue today, but during winter that is a very important check to do. We start off right here with the baggage compartment, making sure it's properly closed and locked so that there's no chance that it could accidentally open in flight. We then move along here and take a look at the upper and also the lower part of the fuselage, checking for any general damage and making sure it all still looks good. We then move along to the horizontal stabilizer, checking both the leading edge, the upper surface, as well as the lower surface for any signs of damage. We can then continue on to the elevator, verifying that it moves freely and that it is still securely attached, that the hinges all look good, and also taking a look at our control cable, making sure it's still in perfect condition. Next up, we take a look at our vertical stabilizer as well as the rudder. Making sure it's securely attached and that it moves freely, and again, taking a look at our control cables, and they all look good on both sides. And then on this side as well, we take a look at our elevator. Again, making sure it's securely attached, moves freely, that the linkages look good. And we also have the trim tab on this side, and we can also make sure that this moves correctly and that the link here is also in perfect condition. We also have a total of 6 static wicks on the tail, 2 on the elevator on each side and 2 on the rudder. And since they can very easily be knocked off by people accidentally walking into them, we make sure that they're all still in place, which they are. Moving along, we again take a look at our horizontal stabilizer at the leading edge, upper and lower surface, and doing the same with the vertical stabilizer as well, just checking for any dents that birds or even large insects might have caused. And standing here also gives us a great view of all of the antennas of the plane, both up on the tail as well as on the fuselage and also below the fuselage. And I can't test them, I'm no mechanic, but the goal is just to make sure that they still look good, that they're all still attached, nothing has broken off. And moving along to the flaps, we're making sure that they are locked in place, can't be moved by hand, that the rails look good, and that the flap actuator is secured in place but still has a little bit of play. Then we move along to our ailerons. We check them for freedom of movement and security. We can take a look at our 3 hinges that we have, as well as the control rod. We then move along, making sure again that our 2 static wicks on the aileron are still in place, that the wingtip looks good. And then we walk along the leading edge, checking it for any damage, as well as also looking at the underside of the wing, making sure all access panels are properly closed and that there's no visible damage anywhere. We then move along to our right main gear, check the tire for proper inflation, any signs of excessive wear or creep, and also taking a look at our brake discs and brake pads as well as the strut. And if that all looks good, we continue on and use the refueling steps to get up onto the plane, and we will visually check the fuel level of the right-hand tank, making sure to properly close the fuel filler cap again. And whilst we're up here, we're also going to take a look at the upper surface of our wings and the fuselage, again checking for any general damage or anything that simply looks out of place. A very important part is checking the oil level using the dipstick to make sure that it's within the required limits. It's around 6.8 quarts today, which would be okay for a short flight since our SOP states that we need at least 6 quarts for flight and up to 8 for a long flight. Making sure to close the access panel properly again, and now verifying that the nose cowling is properly attached with all screws in place. And whilst we're down here, we're also going to take a look at our nose landing gear, verifying that the tire is in good condition and properly inflated. You can also look at our steering actuators, and also one important thing is verifying that the suspension is still properly inflated. We have a nice little gap here, so that tells us that everything is good. We'll also make sure that the exhaust is properly still secured. This is something that you only do if the plane is actually cold, because otherwise you would burn your fingers very, very quickly. Then we take a look at the propeller and spinner, making sure there's no nicks or cracks visible anywhere, and it's securely attached with all screws in place. And then up front here, we also take a look at all of the air intakes and filters. And here on the left side, we also have the alternator belt, where we just make sure that it's still securely attached and that it's not worn down or brittle or anything. And moving along, making sure all screws are in place and all access hatches are closed as well on this side. And then we also have our static port here, and we're just verifying that the opening is clear, that we can see inside, and that tells us that it should all be fine and working. Now it's just a case of basically repeating the same procedure for the other wing again with a few small differences. We're gonna check again the fuel level visually and also take a look at the upper surface of the wing, center part of the fuselage as well, because I'm definitely not tall enough to see it any other way. And then we can move along the leading edge of the wing until we hit the pitot tube. Here again, we are making sure that it is unobstructed, and the same thing also goes for our fuel tank vent here on this side behind the strut. Moving along the wing, we also make sure that the stall warning system looks good and that the underside of the wing and the leading edge are not damaged, with all the access panels closed and secured in place. The wingtip also looks good, just a general visual check, and then we do the same thing on this side with the aileron, checking freedom of movement and security, looking at the static wicks, and moving along to our left-hand flap, making sure it's secured in place with the actuator having a bit of play and the rails looking good. Lastly, before hopping in the plane, we take a look at our left main gear, checking the tire for inflation, any creep, and also taking a look at our strut as well as the brakes. And if we're happy with it, we can now go flying.